I'm sorry. No side effects? No side effects?
All right. So just wanted to respond to this real quick. Kind of got some indications that this was jumping off, and I thought, I think this requires a response. I don't really do reactions, but I will do a response. So the video we're about to watch deals with a couple of women who are expressing frustration about the newly designed male pill. So let's go ahead and check it out and see what all of the complaints are really about. Hold on. All right, sorry. Having some technical issues. There we go. All right. So let's check it out.
Scientists have created the first male birth control pill without side effects.
I'm sorry. No side effects? No side effects? No side effects?
Just saw a video about the new male birth control having no side effects. Don't tell me you're on it because there will be side effects. Every man punched right in the face. And honestly, if you get a broken nose, you should be thankful. No side effects, and they're putting y'all under local anesthetic. I literally raw dogged this IUD and was in pain for weeks. But nah, y'all get painkillers and local anesthesia. Sure, so strong, big strong man. Ugh.
It's always interesting to see how quickly women on social media resort to emasculating men. And most men had nothing to do with developing the pill. This wasn't even something men were protesting. You didn't see men protesting in the streets to get the male pill. I mean, if anything, this has been something that, we would have done decades ago had it, we believed that would be successful. But even now, men weren't protesting for this. This was something that most men found out about in the news. So it's interesting to see how quickly they resort to emasculation, but let's continue.
Don't fucking tell me that you have this. It's not even that I want men to suffer. I don't. But what do you mean they threw the pill out because 3 people had a headache? And my doctor was concerned that my bones were going to get brittle and snap. I could have a blood clot in my lung tomorrow. But your head hurts. Oh, your head will hurt.
The thing about it is, most of us, had we had our rathers, we would have chose this as early as in the 60s. The problem with that, however, is that if we got the pill in the 60s, most of us wouldn't be here right now. Especially after no-fault divorce. Especially after the family court began to weaponize itself in the interest of women. When we caught wind, and mind you, black men started withdrawing from marriage in 1965. So we pulled out before any other group of men in America really figured out what was going on. We didn't have much. We had a lot to lose in not having much, right? So that said, we began to withdraw very early on, right? And by the time the courts really got up to speed and started pulling its agenda on men, the way they have been for several decades now, we knew it was a wrap, right? But had we had the control over our reproductive, abilities like women did, would have been a whole different ball game. But here we go.
Come here. I should preface that I am not a violent human, but what do you mean? They all just really hate us.
Listen up, guys. Scientists have created the first male birth control pill without side effects, and it's reversible. YCT529 just cleared its first human safety test, and unlike traditional birth control pills that disrupt hormones, this experimental pill from Your Choice Therapeutics temporarily halts sperm production without affecting testosterone levels or sex drive. And trials showed it to be completely reversible within 6 weeks of stopping the pill. Experts hope it'll be ready to hit shelves by the end of the decade.
All right, so we see what it is. This is what we're dealing with. The whole question about the male pill. Now, she makes and raises an interesting point, right? She's talking about the way in which women have had to endure all kinds of side effects from the various types of medications that they've had access to, while men have had access to the same things for generations. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I just wanted to say in response to that, yeah. Okay, so it so happens that this pill has no side effects. Whether that's actually the case when things get going, we'll see. But my response to that is we didn't have access to any high level birth control technology, pharmaceutical technology in the last 65 years. And in that 65 years, women have been able to advance their position considerably in ways that we can only, dream about, right? So that in and of itself is kind of a problem, and they were able to have complete control. And I want to share with you, this is an article that I wrote some years ago. Here we go. Tell you when I pull it up. So there it is. And that is not it. There we go. Yep. All right. So me and StreamYard are getting to know each other once again. So here we go. So the article I wrote on my blog, and this was written in October 2018. So we're talking a good 7 years ago. Excuse me. Was entitled, Why Was Black Generation X Fatherless? A brief statement on why many Black men left the family in the 70s, right? And you can see, I'm going to talk about this more in depth in a moment. These are 9 points that really structured the Black Gynocracy. And there are actually 10. So I'm going to give you the update in a moment. Anyway, so I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs just to give you some context on this current discussion. Right. So it reads, these practices accomplished at least 2 things that impacted Black male-female relations. The practices are the 10 points I'm going to read to you in a moment. First, it created what would become a multi-generational sense of entitlement among many Black women who soon forgot that such allowances allowed them opportunities most Black men did not get. We saw this celebrated with Black Girl Magic, Black Girls Rock, so on and so forth. This was presented as Black female superpoweredness. Really all it was is they had policy-based support that Black men didn't get. And when you're talking about a relatively poor and a relatively small community, such things can make a huge difference. Somewhat like, organizations in third world countries. Even the smallest organization providing a resource for a key demographic can have a huge impact on the social dynamics and social relationships in that demographic once those resources, are distributed on a regular basis. Right? That happened in America in the 60s, in the 50s. For the Black community. So anyway, this led to a sense that Black men were failures who could not keep up with Black women's state-supported academic and employment accomplishments, buoyed by a new media industry that centered and used Black women while it simultaneously discredited Black men as stereotypical deadbeat dads, criminals, abusers, and rapists. In other words, this media entrenched the misandrous notion that Black women were fundamentally better than their men, a notion that soon became accepted wisdom even in the mainstream. Remember Ebony's article, Dear Broke Men Don't Punish a Woman for Not Wanting to Date You? Right. This is the kind of entitlement and condescension we're talking about. I continue. Secondly, it created the conditions that spawned an uncoordinated, silent protest among many Black men whose decision-making capacity in families was reduced and made subject to women's fancies. Right. Hence, alongside anti-Black male hyper-incarceration, this is something that really begins in the 1970s, but there were earlier versions of it, particularly in the South prior to that, in the earlier part of the century. I would say in the 70s, we started to see a much more structured prison industrial complex movement, but I digress, right? So alongside anti-Black male hyper-incarceration, the war on drugs, intra-racial homicide, post-deindustrial mass unemployment, and a diminished kindergarten through graduate school education due to a female-administered gynocentric pedagogy, Black men found themselves prisoner to their own biology in ways women were newly liberated from in the 1960s. Even contemporarily, if a man has an unwanted impregnation, people suggest he should have kept it in his pants, while ignoring that women have 5 major birth control options in about 30 different forms: hormonal methods, barrier methods, intrauterine devices, natural methods, and emergency contraception that apply before, during, and after the sex act. And that doesn't include abortion, right? Isn't this strangely reminiscent of when people told women they should have kept their legs closed before the pill? So now we have no problem using that kind of terminology toward men after women get the pill. And nobody has a word to say about it, particularly women who hated hearing, shouldn't you keep your legs closed prior to the pill? They have no problem administering that same logic to men. Meanwhile, what do men have? Condoms, vasectomies, and abstinence. And that was as of 2018 until now. Now we're not, that's almost like, women having nuclear rockets and we're over here using sticks to light fires at night. That's essentially what some of the differences between our access to pharmaceutical technology implies. Now, I do recognize at the same time, as much as there's been kind of a one-sidedness in terms of that access can be dangerous. And there are many people who've lost their lives to this pharmaceutical technology. And that doesn't even speak to the experimental nature on Black bodies that the technology itself required or was used to even get it to the point it was in the 60s. So there's been a lot of death, a lot of Black death in particular for this pharmaceutical technology. But I'm not dismissing that. What I'm pointing to is the social impact that technology had on the Black community. And one of the things it did is it empowered women and at the same time underdeveloped men. It limited our access to our, influence on the production of the Black family. It literally put it in the hands of women, right? And so it just meant that outside of abstinence, and there are issues that go outside of abstinence. I talked about this in a number of presentations I've given in classes and in lectures professionally. But for one example, sleep grape. You can wake up, and this has been documented and has happened many a time. Man can wake up, have somebody on top of him actually finish before he's even cognizant of what's going on, and she's pregnant, right? Now, my point in bringing that up is that even if you consider yourself abstinent, there are ways you can find yourself participatory in something that you don't intend to be. And there are others, but I'm keeping things brief because I'm just trying to do a short show. And I'm gonna give you some solutions to this in a minute, but I just kind of wanted to talk about the difference in access from this technology and why it's so important that men understand the moment. So now we're getting access to this idea of a male pill. And this is going to revolutionize things, provided that it works the way they say it does, right? It's going to take some time before men believe it, if it is worthy of belief, or we find out that, there's a lot that hasn't been said, and that this is really just another level of experimentation. It doesn't work the way we've been told. Only time will tell which it is. But if it is successful, I want men to understand the importance of the moment. Now, I promised that I would get back to the 10 points. And I'm gonna put this up because I want you guys to see it. 10-point foundation of the Black Gynocracy. This is what I started my blog piece with. And I want you guys to kind of understand how the rise of the Gynocracy in the mid-20th century takes place. Now, there are earlier drafts of the Gynocracy that begin in slavery, right? Which is really ordained by white male slave owners, right? Who designate Black women in, varied levels of positions of authority. And this is mainly based on her proximity to him, right? Black men don't have that kind of relationship with white men, where we're authored power, particularly in slavery, and our relationships with white women don't grant us that either, right? Black women's position in relation to white slave owners granted them a degree of authority, decision-making. And then there were even policies that determined the child's status, be they slave or not, based on the status of the mother. These politics created a kind of gynocracy. The mid-20th century, it gets advanced to a whole nother degree. And I point out these 10 issues here. So the first being female excused military drafting policies. And these are not in any order of importance. I'm just listing them, right? So the fact that only men have to get drafted and women don't, right, provides them a degree of, freedom that men don't have. Right? They're not arbitrarily being drafted into war and potentially suffering from death or PTSD or other effects. So that's the first thing, right? And that's still the case to this day. Number two, gynocentric welfare, right? Man in the house rule, meaning that women by policy had access to resources regardless of whether or not men could. Now, the man in the house rule is not officially in effect, but we see the lasting impact of it generations later, to the point where to this day, men do not regularly have as much access to welfare as women. So this meant that poor women still had a safety net. Now, we can talk about how many of these are still in effect in the last 6 months or several months since Trump's been elected, but we're talking about from the 1950s to now. These are the things that has created a gynocracy of sorts. So we have welfare practices that prioritize women's needs. We have family court practices, no-fault divorce, that prioritize women getting custody as opposed to a 50-50 custody standard. So women have access to the children, and using the children, many of them can leverage that power to exact more resources out of men, even if it's documented that she is the inferior parent, right? But these family court policies have been used for generations against men to such a degree that men have begun to seriously withdraw from participating in marriage, right? Number 4, birth control. And this is really what a lot of this is talking about, right? Women have had birth control. Now, the pill starts officially in 1957, but at that time it was considered more, I think, about hormonal control. It's not till 1960 that it's actually able to be discussed freely as a birth control option, right, to prevent pregnancy. Meanwhile, no male pill in sight. So men, again, have been operating with the same methods, vasectomies, the pull-out method, condoms, and abstinence. That's all we've had since long before this period. But still, women were able to advance and have much more control over their bodies. And yes, it came at a cost, where pain and various side effects, but men didn't have the option. We didn't have a choice made for us either, right? If men and women both had access to the pill, even if it came with side effects, that would have changed the game, but it didn't. Women had access, men had none until now. And they're complaining about it, even though we haven't had that access till now. And the pill isn't still widely available for men. It's still coming out. So that speaks volumes about how comfortable they are having access while villainizing men who've had none, right? Number 5, gynocentric Title IX, right? So Title IX practices that prioritize girls and women in federally supported environments like universities, so on and so forth. And even though the language of Title IX policy is often gender neutral, the practice of it is always female-centric and gynocentric, leaving men often in positions where they are unsupported, right? Number 6, gynocentric K through 12 systems that advantage girls and are run by majority females across race. So we're talking, especially about, school. And we know particularly in elementary school, you got about 95% female-led environments, from teachers to administrators. And this goes all the way through grad school, where you have majority females who are in positions of authority, and at the very least, positions of authority in the classroom, right? Leveraging a culture that they often don't have to critically scrutinize, meaning a culture of learning that is often catered to girls and girls' methods of learning, sitting, being quiet, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, boys are villainized for being boys. And if anything, it's suggested that they may have psychological issues that require medication, when in many cases, it might simply be that they have a higher levels of testosterone, which is far more the case. So, we over here, especially in regard to the 19-point Black male political agenda, advocate for separate schools for boys and girls, and separate pedagogies that cater to boys and girls and their particular learning styles. The learning styles that we see work best for the largest percentage of them, right? So that gynocentric K through 12 system has an impact on who graduates, who has access, who goes on to school and graduate school, and so on and so forth. Even though men are using and finding different methods outside of school, part of the reason they've had to is because of how dismissive K through 12 has been for boys. Then you have need-based financial aid. This speaks more to like Pell Grants and things of that nature. When you start talking about men, especially men who've done any degree of time and don't have access to Pell Grants, don't have access to prison education, many of them were adversely affected trying to go to graduate school, trying to go to college, right? Then we have number 8, Black gynocentric affirmative action. Now, affirmative action has been revitalized by DEI, and both have been officially canceled, so to speak, and executive orders and whatnot. But what it often did, now first, I should say both affirmative action and DEI overwhelmingly privileged white women. Once white women described themselves to be a minority, they were the ones to primarily benefit from all of this, right? But what it did do is further eliminate Black men from the conversation, and Black women were considered double minorities. So they were able to get jobs to a greater degree than Black men in white collar spaces, particularly those spaces that are tied to affirmative action or DEI. Both have been recently done away. Well, I should say DEI has been recently done away with, but we still haven't seen the full impact. We know about 318,000 Black women lost their jobs, I want to say by June. I don't know the current numbers yet. I'm going to look that up. But nevertheless, that had an adverse effect on Black men in certain spaces, and really, in many ways, further segregated the work environment in terms of not just race, but also gender, right? Because race became Black women in these spaces, and Black men weren't part of the conversation, and nobody wanted to say it. We were gaslit when we tried to point that out, most particularly by Black women that were also shaming us for not being able to make the kind of resources they could make. So it was kind of a double gaslighting session. And then you have number 9, Black gynocentric media. And this had to do with TV channels, magazines, films that were prioritized for women. And then we started to see this in the 80s and not in the 90s, right? And this is all a response to the 70s when women were courted to enter the workforce after years of protests as feminists. Now, what this did is it created a new economy. And that new economy catered to women who were more participatory when it came to spending, right? Spending in response to advertisement, spending in response to the appearance of status. Women, they found that they had a whole new market in women and children, by the way, but that's a whole nother conversation. Nevertheless, this new access, this new market created by doubling the workforce, women coming into the workforce, which I'm not necessarily against, it's just kind of how it was played out. With that in mind, among other things, you had a new media function that prioritized women's interests. Now, that in and of itself is not my problem. It's not that they prioritize women that bothered me. What that came to mean was the demeaning of men. What became the feminist voice in popular mainstream culture was also tied to a misandrous demeaning of men. So it meant that if you were pro-woman, you also had to be anti-male. And it didn't necessarily have to be that way. You could actually prioritize for women without denigrating men. But the way they chose to go about it and what women chose to support was a gynocentric media that was inherently misandric, and it didn't need to be. And then lastly, and this is what I'm adding that I didn't include in 2018, is greater access to what we call the nonprofit industrial complex. Now that too has been challenged by Trump in terms of federal support. But the idea is that over the last 20 years, really 30, if you look at it, many Black men, especially if you went to college and you started to see the development of these nonprofits that were Black female run, we watched them get funding over funding left and right. And very rarely did you see Black men secure the same kinds of funding, right? There was this nonprofit industry was something we saw run for decades, and it prioritized Black women in many respects. Black males could often not find funding to the degree that many of us didn't even look at creating nonprofits as an option. Now, I'm not saying all. There were some brothers that figured out how to navigate that maze, but it was often a maze that was rigged for males in order to keep us from participating. Women didn't have such barriers, Black women, until recently. And when Trump withdrew a lot of the federal funding behind those grants, that's when we started to see the rubber hit the surface. And so now many Black women are being introduced to Black male life for the first time, and they are not digging it. You know, you're crashing out, as they say, all because this is new, and for them, the safety nets have been pulled. It's not something they like, of course. It's not something they are enjoying, but it is nonetheless what they know. So that said, thank you for joining me. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. I'll let y'all later. Peace.